The 911 call came in at 2:17 a.m., tearing through the graveyard shift quiet of the Fulton County Dispatch Center. The voice on the other end was a ragged gasp, a man's deep baritone fractured by panic. "Please, you have to send someone," he choked out, the words tumbling over each other. "Cherry Blossom Street, number 114. It's my wife, Imani." There was a wet, guttural sound, like a sob trying to fight its way out. The dispatcher, a woman named Sharon who'd heard it all, leaned forward, her voice calm and steady. "Sir, what's wrong with your wife?" A pause, filled with ragged breathing. Then the words that would define the entire case spilled out. She did it. Because of the dog. Oh God, there's blood everywhere." The line went dead. The first patrol car screamed onto Cherry Blossom Street less than 4 minutes later. It was a street from a suburban dream, lined with manicured lawns and two-story brick colonials sleeping under the soft orange glow of streetlights. Number 114 was no different, except for the front door hanging wide open, spilling a rectangle of warm light onto the porch. On the top step sat a large black man, his broad shoulders shaking. This was Leonard Brooks. His head was in his hands, but the officers could see the dark, glistening crimson smeared across his palms and forearms. Officer Miller and Officer Davis, both white, both young, approached with a practiced caution that bordered on aggression. Their hands hovered over their sidearms. "Sir, step away from the house and show me your hands," Miller commanded, his voice tight. Leonard looked up, his eyes wide and vacant, a landscape of pure horror. He didn't seem to register the command, just stared through them. "She's inside," he whispered. "She's gone." The officers exchanged a look. It was a look that said, "We've got our guy." They saw a big blood-covered black man and a dead wife. In their world, the math was simple. Davis roughly pulled Leonard to his feet, cuffing him with a sharp, metallic click while Miller went inside, his mag light cutting a nervous beam through the darkness. The interior of the home was a portrait of violent contradiction. The living room was immaculate, with family photos on the mantel, a smiling couple, Leonard and Imani, often holding a floppy-eared beagle. But the scene bled into the kitchen, and there, chaos reigned. Imani Brooks lay on the pristine tile floor, a single dark hole in the chest of her white nightgown. A pool of blood, shockingly large and dark, spread around her like a grotesque halo. Her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling with a look of stunned surprise. But it was the rest of the kitchen that held the true strangeness. The dining table was set for two. A bottle of expensive Merlot was open, 2 glasses poured. Candles had been lit, now burned down to waxy puddles. It was a scene of romance, violently interrupted, and on the stove, a heavy cast-iron pot sat on a burner that was still faintly warm. A strange gamey aroma, thick and cloying, hung in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. Miller lifted the lid with the tip of his pen. Inside was a dark, stringy stew. He'd never seen meat that looked quite like it. He felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a simple domestic dispute. This was something else. Something deeply, profoundly wrong. When Detective Jabari Zinga arrived 20 minutes later, the scene was already contaminated by assumption. Yellow tape cordoned off the house, its plastic glare harsh in the flashing blue and red lights. He saw Leonard Brooks in the back of a squad car, a silent, hulking silhouette against the cage. He saw the way Miller and Davis stood, their chests puffed out, talking to the sergeant like they'd already closed the case. Jabari sighed. 52 years old, with a face like a road map of Atlanta's worst nights and hair more salt than pepper, he'd been a detective long enough to know that the simplest answer was rarely the right one. His partner, Amara Oinkena, pulled up behind him. She was 35, sharp and methodical, her eyes missing nothing. She had transferred from Chicago 3 months ago and still wasn't used to the humid Georgia nights. "What's the patrol's take?" she asked, her voice low as they ducked under the tape. "Big black guy, dead wife, blood on his hands," Jabari said, his tone heavy with cynicism. "They've probably already written the report in their heads. Let's go see what they missed." As they stepped into the house, the conflicting scents hit them full force. The cloying sweetness of the wine, the copper of the blood, and that strange, unidentifiable meat. Jabari's eyes swept the scene, taking in the body, the overturned chair, the shattered plate on the floor. But his gaze, like Miller's, was drawn to the pot on the stove. Amara walked over to it, her expression clinical. "A special dinner," she murmured, her gaze flicking from the romantic table setting to the body on the floor. Jabari nodded, a grim feeling settling deep in his bones. This was more than a murder. This was a story, and the first chapter was a scream in the night. The rest, he knew, would be written in blood, secrets, and the contents of that mysterious pot. The mini-hook was already set. What was in that pot, and how did it connect a romantic dinner to a brutal death? Detective Jabari Zinga had a way of commanding a room without raising his voice. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace that belied the sharp, analytical mind working behind his tired eyes. As he surveyed the kitchen, he noticed the small details the initial officers had likely overlooked. The faint scuff marks on the tile floor near the back door. The single unlit candle on the counter next to a book of matches. The way the wine in Imani's glass was untouched, while the other glass was half empty. Amara Oinkena was already at work, her movements precise. She photographed everything, her methodical nature a perfect counterpoint to Jabari's intuitive approach. "Forensics is on their way," she said, her voice a low murmur. "I've told them to prioritize whatever is in that pot. The smell, it's like nothing I've ever encountered." Jabari knelt beside Imani's body, careful not to disturb anything. He didn't look at her face. He'd learned long ago to separate the person from the evidence. He noted the position of her arms, the defensive posture of her left hand, as if she had tried to push something, or someone, away. The gunshot wound was clean, almost surgical, suggesting a close-range shot. "No shell casing," he observed aloud. "Either a revolver or the killer was neat." He stood up and walked over to the back of the squad car where Leonard Brooks was being held. The initial patrol officers stood nearby, their body language broadcasting a mix of pride and impatience. Jabari ignored them, tapping lightly on the car window. Leonard, who had been staring blankly at the floor, slowly lifted his head. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Detective Zinga. This is my partner, Detective Oinkena," Jabari said, his voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the barking commands Leonard had heard earlier. "We need to understand what happened here tonight." For the first time, a flicker of something other than shock appeared in Leonard's eyes. Maybe it was the sight of a black detective, a man who looked at him not as a stereotype, but as a person. He took a shaky breath. "I told them," he rasped, his voice raw. "I got home, and I found her, like that." "You were away?" Amara asked, her notepad already out. "Hunting," Leonard said, the word catching in his throat. "I have a small cabin up near Lake Lanier. I left yesterday morning. I was supposed to be back tomorrow, but the weather turned. I decided to come home early." "What time did you get back, Mr. Brooks?" Jabari asked. Here, Leonard hesitated. His eyes darted away, refusing to meet Jabari's gaze. "I don't know. Late. After 1, maybe 2 in the morning." It was the first crack in his story. The 911 call was at 2:17 a.m. It was a tight timeline. Too tight. "You said on the phone something about a dog," Amara prodded gently. The change in Leonard was instantaneous and profound. The vacant grief in his eyes was replaced by a flash of raw, animalistic pain. His cuffed hands clenched into fists. "Buster," he choked out. "Our dog, a beagle. He's gone. She loved that dog." Jabari and Amara exchanged a look. She loved that dog. It was a strange thing to say about his wife, in the past tense, while her body was still cooling on the kitchen floor. But the mention of the dog on the 911 call, she did it because of the dog, now hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meaning. "Why would your wife do something because of the dog, Leonard?" Jabari pressed, keeping his tone soft. "I don't know," Leonard suddenly yelled, his voice cracking as he slammed his head back against the seat. "I don't know what it means. I just came home and he was gone and she was... Oh God, Imani." He broke down completely, his large frame convulsing with sobs that were silent and wrenching. Jabari let him cry. He'd seen enough grief, real and fake, to know the difference. Leonard's pain felt genuine, but grief didn't preclude guilt. Sometimes it was the very engine of it. Back inside the house, Jabari walked through the rooms. Everything was in its place. This wasn't a robbery. In the master bedroom, he saw two distinct styles clashing. One side of the room was neat and orderly, with clothes folded and books stacked. The other side was chaotic. Makeup was strewn across a vanity. Clothes were piled on a chair, and a small stack of self-help books on managing anxiety lay on the nightstand. It was a room inhabited by two very different energies. Amara met him in the hallway. "I found this on the kitchen counter, tucked behind the fruit bowl," she said, holding up a small leather dog collar in an evidence bag. A silver tag glinted under the light. It read, "Buster, if I'm lost, my dad is probably crying. Call him." A phone number was engraved below. "He said she loved the dog," Jabari mused, looking at the collar. "So why is Buster missing, and why is his collar on the kitchen counter on the night his owner is murdered?" The question hung unanswered. The forensics team had arrived and was beginning its slow, careful dance. One of them, a young tech named Sarah, called Amara over to the pot on the stove. "We're bagging the entire pot to take back to the lab," she said. "But detective, you should see this." She pointed to the counter next to the stove. Lying there, almost hidden by a cookbook, was a single long strand of coarse brown and white hair. It was too stiff for a human, too short for a cat. It looked exactly like the hair of a beagle. Amara felt a cold chill, the strange meat, the missing dog, the collar on the counter, and now this. A horrifying, unthinkable theory was beginning to form in the back of her mind, a theory so grotesque she didn't dare voice it yet. Leonard's testimony was a mess of contradictions and emotional outbursts, but it was the silent evidence in the house that was starting to scream the loudest. The mini hook was no longer just about the pot. It was about the impossible connection between the loving pet in the photos and the grisly scene in the kitchen. Dawn broke over Cherry Blossom Street, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gray. The harsh strobing of police lights was replaced by the mundane reality of a new day, but the yellow tape served as a stark reminder of the night's horrors. The neighborhood was waking up, and with it, the whispers began. Curtains twitched, doors opened a crack. The crime scene had become a spectacle. Jabari knew that the first 24 hours were critical, and neighbors were a goldmine of information, even if it was buried under layers of gossip and prejudice. He and Amara started with the house directly to the right, a perfectly kept home with an American flag displayed proudly on the porch. A woman in her late 60s with tightly permed white hair and suspicious eyes answered the door. "Mrs. Collins." "A terrible business," she said, clutching her floral housecoat. "Just terrible. They were always a quiet couple, kept to themselves mostly." "Did you notice anything unusual last night, Mrs. Collins?" Amara asked, her pen poised over her notebook. "Any sounds? Shouting?" Mrs. Collins pursed her lips. "Well, they've been louder these past few months, arguing. I couldn't make out the words, mind you, but you can tell an angry tone." She leaned in conspiratorially. "It was almost always about that dog of his, Buster. He doted on that animal. She seemed to tolerate it at first." "At first?" Jabari prompted. "Lately she was different. I saw her yelling at the poor thing in the yard last week, just screaming at it for digging in her flower bed. Leonard came running out and scooped the dog up like it was a baby. They had a fierce row right there on the lawn. Next, they crossed the street to speak with a man named Mark, who was pretending to trim his hedges while openly staring at the Brooks house. He was in his 40s, with a faded college football t-shirt stretched tight over his gut. His welcome was decidedly cooler. "Can't say I'm surprised," he said, not even looking at them as he snipped at a perfectly healthy branch. "Always a lot of drama with people like them." Jabari's jaw tightened, but his expression remained impassive. He'd heard that dog whistle 1,000 times. "People like them, sir?" Mark finally turned, his eyes holding a casual, ingrained disdain. "You know, loud music sometimes, cars coming and going at all hours. Just a different vibe." "Did you see or hear anything last night?" Amara cut in, her voice sharp, redirecting the interview. "Nah, went to bed early, had to be up for work," he grunted, turning back to his hedges, his message clear. "I'm done talking to you." The racial geography of the neighborhood was becoming clear. The Brooks family were one of only 2 black families on the street. The other, the Thompsons, lived 3 houses down. Their reception was entirely different. A woman named Alicia Thompson opened the door, her face etched with genuine sadness. "I can't believe it," she said, inviting them inside. "Imani, we weren't close friends, but we'd talk. She seems so lost lately." "Lost in what way?" Jabari asked, taking a seat on a plush sofa. "Paranoid," Alicia said, shaking her head. "She told me a few weeks ago she thought her colleagues were trying to get her fired. Said Leonard was siding with the enemy. When I asked who the enemy was, she looked at Buster, who was sitting at Leonard's feet, and just said, 'Him.' It was chilling." Alicia confirmed what Mrs. Collins had said. The fights had become more frequent and were almost exclusively about the dog. She described Imani's love for Leonard as possessive and desperate. "She once told me she felt like she was competing for his affection," Alicia recalled, "and she was losing to a beagle." As they were wrapping up, Alicia's teenage son, Kevin, came downstairs. He was holding a skateboard and froze when he saw the detectives. "Kevin, these are detectives asking about the Brooks," his mother said gently. The boy shifted his weight nervously. I saw something last night," he mumbled. Jabari and Amara immediately focused their attention on him. "What did you see, son?" Jabari asked. "I was out late, skating with my friends at the park down the street," he began, avoiding his mother's glare. "When I was coming home, around 9:30 p.m., I think, I saw Mr. Brooks's truck pull into his driveway." The statement landed with the force of a physical blow. 9:30 p.m., not 2 a.m. Leonard's alibi, the one shaky pillar holding up his story of innocence, had just been demolished. "Are you sure it was his truck, Kevin?" Amara asked, her voice steady but firm. "Yeah, positive. It's a big Ford F-150, got a dent in the rear bumper. I see it every day. He got out of the truck and went inside. I remember because I thought it was weird he was back so early from his hunting trip." Jabari thanked the Thompsons for their time, his mind racing. They walked back towards the crime scene, the quiet morning air now thick with damning new information. "He lied," Amara stated the obvious. "He was home at least 4 hours before he called 911. "He lied, or the kid is mistaken," Jabari countered, though he didn't believe it himself. The kid's description of the truck was too specific. "Why lie?" Amara wondered aloud. "If he found her dead at 9:30 p.m., why wait until 2 a.m. to call for help? What was he doing for 4.5 hours? The question was unsettling, opening up a dark window of time that could have been filled with anything. Panic, rage, or the careful construction of a cover-up. The whispers of the neighbors had done more than just paint a picture of a troubled marriage. They had provided a timeline that pointed a finger directly at Leonard Brooks. The mini-hook was now a glaring inconsistency. Leonard was home hours before he claimed. The mystery was no longer just what happened, but when and what occurred during those missing hours. Back inside the suffocating quiet of house number 114, the forensic team worked with an almost reverent silence. For Amara Oinkina, this was where the real story began to unfold, not in the contradictory statements of a grieving husband, but in the cold, hard language of physical evidence. While Jabari dealt with the living, she focused on what the dead had left behind. Her attention was drawn back to the kitchen, the epicenter of the tragedy. She put on a fresh pair of gloves and began her own meticulous sweep. She noted the brand of wine on the table, a vintage Leonard and Imani had posted about on social media for their anniversary last year. A special occasion. She saw the 2 plates, one with a small portion of the strange stew served onto it, the other clean. Imani's plate was the one with the food. The fork was on the plate, suggesting she had taken at least one bite. Then she saw the water and food bowls for the dog, tucked away in a corner. The water bowl was full of fresh, clean water. But the food bowl was empty and scrubbed clean, as if it had been washed and put away. It struck her as odd. People who love their dogs don't typically scrub their food bowl clean after a meal. They rinse it or leave it for the next feeding. This bowl looked like it was being stored, not used. "Jabari," she called out, her voice low. "Take a look at this." Jabari came over from the bedroom. Amara pointed to the bowls. "Water bowl is full. Food bowl is spotless. If Buster just ran away, as Leonard suggested, wouldn't his food bowl still be out? Maybe even with some kibble in it?" Jabari nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "You're right. It's too neat. It's deliberate." Amara then moved to the bathroom connected to the master bedroom. It was as chaotic as Imani's side of the bedroom. The medicine cabinet was a jumble of prescriptions and over-the-counter remedies, but one bottle, tucked in the back, caught her eye. It was an amber prescription vial. The label read, Imani Brooks Risperidone. Take 1 tablet daily for mood stabilization. It was a powerful antipsychotic, often used to treat bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. The prescription was filled a month ago with a 30-day supply. Amara unscrewed the cap and poured the contents into her gloved hand. She counted the small white pills. 26. Imani had only taken 4 pills out of a 30-day supply. For the last 3.5 weeks, she had effectively been off her medication. We need to talk to her psychiatrist, Amara said, showing the vial to Jabari. This changes things. If she was off her meds, her behavior, the paranoia the neighbors described, it all starts to make a terrifying kind of sense. The discovery cast a new light on the entire case. Imani wasn't just a jealous wife. She was a woman in the throes of a serious, unmedicated mental illness. Her perception of reality could have been dangerously skewed. The focus returned, as it always did, to the pot. The head of the forensics team, a stoic man named David Chen, approached them. He was holding the bagged pot, ready for transport to the lab. Detectives, we did a preliminary field test on the residue on that knife we found in the sink, Chen said, pointing to a large chef's knife that was also being bagged. It's definitely blood, and we found traces of the same hair you spotted earlier. It's canine. The word hung in the air. Canine. I've put a rush on the analysis of the stew, Chen continued, his face grim. But I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have a very bad feeling about what we're going to find. The bone fragments in there, they're small. Too small for beef or pork. The unthinkable theory that had been lurking in the back of Amara's mind now felt chillingly real. She looked from the pot to the empty clean dog bowl to the dog collar on the counter. A narrative was forming, piece by horrifying piece. A narrative of jealousy, paranoia, and an act of cruelty so profound it defied comprehension. Jabari ran a hand over his weary face. The case was twisting, turning itself inside out. Leonard Brooks had the motive, a potential crime of passion upon discovering a monstrous act. He had the opportunity. His alibi was broken. But the victim, Imani Brooks, was no longer just a victim. She was now a complex figure, a woman whose own actions on her final day might have been the catalyst for her death. Get a warrant for her medical records, Amara, Jabari ordered, his voice strained. And get a timeline on that prescription. I want to know exactly when she stopped taking it. As the forensics team carried the pot out of the house like a sacred, cursed object, Jabari stood in the center of the kitchen. The romantic dinner setting seemed to mock him. This wasn't a celebration of love. It was a stage for a final, twisted performance. The mini-hook was now a confirmed medical fact. Imani was suffering from a severe mental illness and was off her medication. Her actions were no longer just strange. They were potentially driven by a profound break from reality, and the contents of that pot held the key to her final, desperate act. A search warrant for the entire property gave Jabari and Amara access to the innermost sanctums of the Brooks' lives. While the forensics team dusted for prints and searched for a murder weapon, Jabari felt a pull toward the master bedroom. He had a hunch that the key to understanding Imani's state of mind wasn't in a lab, but in her own words. He started with her side of the bed, the chaotic landscape of clothes and cosmetics. Beneath the bed, tucked away under a pile of forgotten sweaters, was a small leather-bound journal. He opened it. The first few entries, dated 6 months prior, were filled with a hopeful, almost girlish script. June 12th. Leonard surprised me with tickets to the jazz festival. He knows me so well. Sometimes when he looks at me, I feel like the only person in the world. I love him so much. June 28th. He brought that dog home today. Buster. A rescue from the county shelter. His eyes are so sad. Leonard says he needed something to care for. I guess it's sweet, as long as it stays off the good furniture. Jabari flipped through the pages. The tone began to shift subtly at first, then with alarming speed. The neat cursive grew jagged, the pressure of the pen digging into the paper. July 15th. All he does is talk about the dog. Buster did this, Buster did that. We went for a walk, and he held the leash with more care than he holds my hand. It's stupid to be jealous of an animal. I know it is, but I am. August 2nd. I think the dog watches me. I was on the phone with my sister, and he just sat there, staring. His head was tilted. He knows. He's trying to figure me out. He's on Leonard's side, always. The entries became more sporadic, more frantic. Entire paragraphs were crossed out with furious black ink. August 20th. Leonard took him to work today. He said it was because of a chewing issue. He's a liar. He's afraid to leave me alone with his precious pet. He thinks I'm the danger. He's choosing the dog over his own wife. The pills make me feel slow, like I'm moving through water. I stopped taking them. I need to be sharp. I need to see things clearly. Here it was, the confession, written in her own hand, the moment she decided to abandon the chemical tether that had been keeping her grounded. Amara came into the room as Jabari was reading, and he handed her the journal. She read the last few entries aloud, her voice barely a whisper. September 5th. He looks at me with judgment. I see it in his eyes. He knows I know. He is the wedge between us, the furry, four-legged rival for my husband's heart. Leonard brings him treats, but he looks at me with suspicion. I have to do something. A marriage is for two people, not two people and a spy. The final entry was dated the day before her death. The handwriting was a barely legible scrawl, slanting violently across the page. It was less a diary entry and more a manifesto. September 10th. Tomorrow, Leonard leaves for his trip. The house will be quiet. It will be just me and the rival. I have a plan, a grand gesture, a way to prove my love and remove the obstacle forever. I will prepare a special dinner for Leonard when he returns, a reconciliation feast. He will eat my offering and he will understand. He will finally see that my love is all-consuming, that I would do anything to have him back. He will become one with his beloved pet, and then he will be all mine. Forever. A chill went through the room. It wasn't just a plan to kill the dog. It was a ritual, a twisted symbolic act born from a mind that had completely shattered. The reconciliation feast was the stew in the pot. The obstacle was Buster. My God, Amara breathed, closing the journal. She documented it. She saw it as a romantic gesture. She saw it as a solution, Jabari corrected grimly. In her world, the logic was perfect. Remove the competition, reclaim the husband. The problem is, her world wasn't this one. The diary was a roadmap into madness. It explained the paranoia, the jealousy, the rage. It explained what was likely in the pot on the stove. But it also created a powerful, undeniable motive for Leonard. If he had come home and discovered this, discovered that his wife had not only killed his beloved dog, but had cooked him, what would a man do in that moment? Would he snap? Would a crime of passion follow a crime of insanity? The journal gave them Imani's motive for her actions, but it also handed them Leonard's motive for murder on a silver platter. They now understood the why behind the first horrific act, but the central question remained: who committed the second? Jabari carefully placed the diary into an evidence bag. It was the most compelling and most disturbing piece of evidence he had ever encountered. It was the voice of the victim, reaching out from beyond the grave, not to name her killer, but to explain the terrible, insane love that had set the stage for her own death. The mini-hook was now a written confession. Imani had not only planned to kill the dog, she had planned to feed it to her husband as an act of love, creating the ultimate motive for his rage. The call came late in the afternoon. Jabari was back at the precinct, staring at the evidence board, which was growing more complex by the hour. On one side was Leonard, the broken alibi, the blood on his hands, the clear motive of rage and revenge. On the other side was Imani, the diary, the abandoned medication, the portrait of a mind descending into a private hell. His phone buzzed, displaying the number for the GBI forensics lab. He put it on speaker so Amara could hear. "Detective Zinga, this is Dr. Miles from the lab," the voice on the other end said. It was clipped, professional, but with an undercurrent of something that sounded like shock. "We've finished the analysis on the contents of that pot you sent over." "Go ahead, doctor," Jabari said, bracing himself. There was a short pause, as if the doctor was choosing his words carefully. "The meat has been conclusively identified via DNA analysis. The sample matches the canine hair follicles found at the scene. It's dog meat, detective. Specifically, it appears to be from a single beagle. Silence filled the office. Even though they had expected it, the confirmation landed like a punch to the gut. Amara sank into her chair, her face pale. Jabari closed his eyes for a brief moment. "There's more," Dr. Miles continued, his voice strained. "The medical examiner just forwarded his preliminary stomach content analysis for your victim, Imani Brooks. We ran a concurrent DNA test. She had the same meat in her stomach. She consumed a portion of the stew shortly before her death." This was a new, sickening twist. Imani hadn't just cooked the dog, she had eaten it. It was a detail so grotesque, so far beyond the pale, that it seemed to defy all rational explanation. Was it part of her twisted ritual, a final act of consumption to absorb her rival? The question was unanswerable, a glimpse into a level of psychosis that was terrifying to contemplate. "Thank you, doctor," Jabari said, his voice a low growl. He ended the call and stared at the board. "She ate him," Amara whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "Why? Why would she do that?" "We're past why, Amara," Jabari said, turning from the board. "We're in a place where logic doesn't apply. She wasn't thinking, she was spiraling. This wasn't about hunger. This was about power, about annihilation." The revelation changed the dynamics of their interview strategy. They now had irrefutable proof of the event that had likely triggered the murder. They could confront Leonard not with theories, but with cold, hard, sickening facts. They brought Leonard back into the interrogation room. He looked smaller than before, diminished by a night in a holding cell and the weight of his grief. He sat hunched over, staring at his cuffed hands on the metal table. "Mr. Brooks," Jabari began, his voice devoid of accusation, simply stating a fact. "We know what was in the pot." Leonard didn't look up. "We know that your wife killed Buster," Jabari continued, his voice steady. "We know she cooked him. We have the forensic evidence." Leonard's body went rigid. A low, guttural sound, like a wounded animal, escaped his lips. He started to rock back and forth, a slow, rhythmic motion of pure agony. Amara slid a folder across the table. It didn't contain crime scene photos. It was the lab report, a sterile document filled with scientific terminology. "The report is conclusive, Leonard," she said softly. "We also know that Imani, she ate some of it. It was in her stomach." That was the detail that broke him. Leonard let out a raw, soul-shattering howl of despair. It wasn't the cry of a guilty man caught in a lie. It was the sound of a heart being torn apart. He lunged forward, not in aggression but in collapse, slamming his forehead onto the cold metal table, his shoulders heaving with violent, uncontrollable sobs. The guards outside tensed, but Jabari held up a hand. "Get him some water," he said to Amara, his gaze fixed on the broken man in front of him. This was the turning point. The case was no longer a whodunit. It was a profound human tragedy. The horror of Imani's act was now confirmed, and it was so extreme that it made Leonard's potential reaction, a sudden, violent explosion of rage, seem almost understandable, if not excusable. The forensic proof had given them the what. The diary had given them the why for Imani. But they still lacked the final pieces. They didn't have the murder weapon that killed Imani, and they hadn't found the rest of Buster's remains. Leonard was too deep in his grief to give them a coherent story. He was trapped in the horror of the revelation. "There's more out there," Jabari said to Amara as they stood outside the interrogation room, listening to Leonard's muffled sobs. "The knife in the sink was used on the dog, not Imani. The gun that killed her is still missing, and so is the rest of that poor animal. He can't tell us, so we have to find it ourselves." The mini-hook was now a confirmed stomach-turning fact from the lab. The unthinkable had happened. This shifted the entire focus of the investigation. It was no longer about proving if Leonard had a motive, but about finding the physical evidence of how he acted on that motive in the wake of an unimaginable horror. Leonard Brooks was in no condition to be interrogated further. He was placed under medical watch, his grief so profound it bordered on catatonia. For Jabari and Amara, this meant the human element of the investigation had hit a wall. They had to rely on the ground. "He was home for 4.5 hours before he called 911, Amara said, pacing in their small office. If he killed her in a fit of rage at 9:30 p.m., what did he do for the next 4 hours? He was cleaning up, hiding things. Hiding a gun and hiding what was left of his dog, Jabari finished, his gaze drifting to a map of the Brooks property pinned to the wall. The house backed onto a dense patch of woodland, part of a small, undeveloped greenbelt that ran between the suburban cul-de-sacs. It's too big an area to search effectively on foot, especially if we don't know what we're looking for. So we bring in someone who does, Amara suggested. Jabari nodded. Make the call. Get me the best K9 unit we have. An hour later, a black and white SUV from the K9 division pulled up to the curb on Cherry Blossom Street. The yellow tape was still up, a constant source of fascination for the neighbors. Officer Mike Santini stepped out, a tall, lean man with a calm demeanor that was a requirement for his job. At his side, alert and vibrating with contained energy, was Blitz, a magnificent German shepherd with a sable coat and intelligent dark eyes. Blitz was a dual-purpose K9, trained in both patrol work and cadaver detection. His sense of smell was a finely tuned scientific instrument, capable of detecting the specific chemical compounds of decomposition from hundreds of yards away. Detective Zinga, Santini said with a respectful nod, heard you've got a tough one. That's putting it mildly, Mike, Jabari replied. We're looking for two things, a firearm, likely a handgun or revolver, and the remains of a small dog, a beagle. We believe they may have been buried or hidden somewhere on the property or in the adjacent woods. Santini knelt down and gave Blitz a quiet command. He presented the dog with a cloth that had been wiped inside Buster's dog bed, giving him a scent to track. Okay, buddy, Santini murmured, stroking Blitz's head. Find his friend. He gave another command. Such, the German word for seek, and Blitz was off. The dog moved with a joyful efficiency that was mesmerizing to watch. He wasn't just sniffing, he was analyzing, processing a world of information invisible to the humans following him. He quartered the backyard methodically, his nose hovering just inches above the grass. He swept past the manicured flower beds, the patio furniture, the pristine gas grill. Nothing. Then, Blitz's body language changed. His tail, which had been wagging loosely, straightened. His head went up, testing the air. He trotted purposefully toward the back of the property, where a small garden shed stood near the tree line. Jabari noticed a patch of disturbed earth near the shed, a detail he had clocked on his first walkthrough. It was where a patch of Imani's prized roses had been, now just a square of freshly turned soil. Blitz sniffed at the disturbed earth intensely, whining softly. He pawed at the ground once, then looked back at Santini, a clear sign. He's got something here, Santini said, but it's faint. The smell is old, or it's been covered up. A forensic tech was called over to carefully excavate the soil. As they dug, the faint, sweet smell of bleach rose from the earth. He poured bleach on it, Amara said, her voice tight with disgust. He was trying to mask the scent. But you can't fool a dog like Blitz. After a few minutes of digging, the tech unearthed scraps of bloody paper towels and a small, empty bottle of industrial-strength cleaner. Evidence of a cleanup, but not the source. Blitz, however, was no longer interested in the patch of dirt. His nose was back in the air, his attention fixed on the dark, cool woods beyond the fence. He let out a low, insistent bark. He wants to go in there, Santini said. The scent is stronger in that direction. It's being carried on the breeze. Jabari nodded to the uniformed officer at the property line. Let them through. Santini unclipped Blitz's leash, giving him freedom to range. The dog shot through the gap in the fence and disappeared into the dense undergrowth. The small team of detectives and officers followed, the sounds of the suburban street fading behind them, replaced by the crunch of leaves and the buzzing of insects. They moved deeper into the woods, following the sound of Blitz's occasional barks as he cast back and forth, homing in on the source of the scent. The forest was cool and dark, sunlight struggling to pierce the thick canopy of leaves. It was the perfect place to hide a secret. After about 10 minutes of pushing through tangled vines and low-hanging branches, they heard it, a series of sharp, frantic barks from up ahead. "He's found it!" Santini yelled, breaking into a run. They crested a small rise and saw Blitz, about 50 yards away, digging furiously at the base of a huge, ancient oak tree. The dog was consumed by his task, sending dirt flying behind him. This was his final indication, the trained behavior that signaled he had found the source. The mini hook was set. Blitz, the silent, four-legged detective, had followed a trail of scent that was invisible to human eyes, past the bleach-soaked decoy, and deep into the woods. He was now signaling the discovery of something Leonard had desperately tried to hide. The question was, what exactly had he buried beneath that old oak tree? The gun, the dog, or something even worse? The air around the old oak tree was heavy and still. The only sounds were the panting of Blitz, who now sat patiently by the spot he had indicated, and the strained breathing of the officers who had followed him. The forensic team arrived minutes later, carrying shovels and evidence collection kits. The dig began with a somber reverence. The soil was soft and loamy, easy to turn over. Less than 2 feet down, a shovel struck something soft. The tech switched to a smaller trowel, carefully scraping away the dirt. The corner of a burlap sack came into view. A wave of the foul, unmistakable odor of decomposition washed over them, a smell that clung to the back of the throat. Carefully, they lifted the sack from the shallow grave. It was heavy and damp. One of the techs, a young man with a pale face, cut the twine holding it shut and gently peeled back the opening. Even seasoned professionals like Jabari had to look away for a moment. Inside the sack were the remains of Buster. His hide had been crudely removed, but the head was intact, the beagle's soft, pleading eyes now glassy and lifeless. It was a pathetic, heartbreaking sight. Amara turned and walked a few paces away, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Leonard hadn't just buried his dog, he had desecrated him. Or perhaps Imani had, and he had simply gathered the pieces. The scene in the shed now made more sense. That was likely where the gruesome work had been done. They documented the contents of the sack, each photo a testament to the horror of the dog's final hours. But as they worked, Santini noticed that Blitz was not relaxed. The dog, his job technically done, was still agitated. He wasn't looking at the sack, but was sniffing intently at a thick briar patch a few yards away from the tree. He whined, a low, anxious sound. "He's still onto something," Santini said, his trust in his partner absolute. The primary scent was the remains, but there's something else over there, something metallic maybe. Santini explained that gunpowder and gun oil have a distinct sharp odor that dogs can be trained to detect. Amara, having composed herself, took a powerful flashlight and cautiously approached the briar patch. She pushed aside the thorny branches with a gloved hand, shining the light into the dense thicket, and then she saw it. Wedged deep inside the thorns, wrapped in an oil-stained rag, was a hunting knife. It was a large, formidable blade, the kind used for skinning game. The wooden handle was dark with what was clearly dried blood, and matted bits of fur clung to the hilt. It was undoubtedly the weapon used to dismember Buster. "Got it," she called out. The team carefully extracted the knife from the thorns. As a tech held it up in the dapple sunlight, something caught Jabari's eye. Carved neatly into the base of the wooden handle were 2 small, elegant letters, L.B. Leonard Brooks. The discovery landed like a judge's gavel. It was one thing to find the dog's remains. It was another thing entirely to find the weapon used to butcher him, with the suspect's own initials carved into it. This was the kind of physical evidence a prosecutor dreams of. It tied Leonard directly to the grisly aftermath. "He lied about everything," one of the younger officers muttered. "He wasn't just hiding the body. He did this." The narrative seemed to lock into place. Leonard comes home. He finds his wife has killed his dog. In a blind rage, he shoots her. Then, over the next 4 hours, he performs a grim, methodical cleanup. He takes the dog's remains and the knife he used to dismember it and buries them deep in the woods. He ditches the gun somewhere else. He scrubs the shed. He goes back inside, composes himself, and makes the 911 call, feigning shock and ignorance. It was a clean, logical, and damning sequence of events. They now had the motive, the broken alibi, and a key piece of physical evidence linking him to the aftermath. The case against Leonard Brooks was becoming an ironclad fortress. But for Jabari, something still felt off. The level of calculation required for that cleanup seemed at odds with the raw, uncontrollable grief he'd seen in Leonard. And there was still one crucial piece missing from the puzzle: the gun that had killed Imani. The knife explained what happened to the dog, but not what happened to the woman. As they packed up the evidence and led a satisfied Blitz back out of the woods, Jabari lagged behind. He looked back at the disturbed grave and the thorny briar patch. Secrets had been unearthed, but he had the gnawing feeling that the biggest secret of all was still buried. The discovery of the knife with Leonard's initials should have been the final nail in the coffin. Instead, it felt like a misdirection, another chapter in a story that was growing darker and more complex with every revelation. The mini hook was sharp and damning. The knife used to butcher the dog belonged to Leonard. It seemed like the case was closed, but for Jabari, it only opened up more questions about the missing gun and the true nature of Leonard's actions during those 4 lost hours. While the search team was in the woods, the digital forensics unit at the precinct had finally cracked the password on Imani Brooks's phone. It was pathetically simple: Leonard's birthday. The lead tech, a young woman named Chloe, called Amara with a warning in her voice. "Detective Oinkina," she said, "you need to see this, but I'm telling you now, it's bad. I've never seen anything like it." Amara and Jabari headed straight back to the precinct. In a sterile lab, Chloe turned a monitor toward them. "This is from the phone's gallery," she said, her face grim. The timestamp started around 4 p.m. on the day of the murder. The first few photos were of Buster, sleeping peacefully on the living room rug. They were normal, loving pet pictures. Then the gallery took a nightmarish turn. The next photo was of the large hunting knife, the same one they'd just found in the woods, lying on the kitchen counter. Then a photo of Buster, now confined to the small laundry room, looking up at the camera with confused, trusting eyes. What followed was a step-by-step photographic documentation of an execution. The images were clear, well-lit, and composed with a chilling artistry. There were photos of Imani leading the dog to the shed, a photo of her smiling, holding the knife. Then, a series of images so horrific that Amara had to physically turn away. Imani had captured every stage of the butchering process, posing in some of them as if she were a celebrity chef showcasing her technique. The final pictures were of the meat in the pot, simmering on the stove, and a single, beautifully arranged plate of the stew, garnished with parsley, ready for a photo shoot. It was a digital diary of her madness, far more visceral and disturbing than the handwritten journal. She wasn't just descending into insanity, she was curating it, documenting it for an audience that existed only in her fractured mind. "There are videos too," Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. "I won't play them unless you order me to. It's the same, just with sound." "No," Jabari said, his voice thick. "We've seen enough." But the phone had one more secret to give up. Chloe navigated to the audio recorder app. "There's one file here, created at 7:15 p.m. that evening. It's 15 minutes long." She hit play. Imani's voice filled the small room. At first, it was a high, excited whisper. "He's coming home to a surprise. The perfect surprise. For months it's been Buster, Buster, Buster. That dog, that filthy animal, has been drinking the love that belongs to me. Leonard thinks I don't see how he looks at it, but tonight, that all changes. Tonight, Buster disappears, and we become one big happy family, for real this time." Her voice morphed, shifting from giddy excitement to simmering resentment. "I used his special knife, the one he takes hunting. It felt right, poetic, using the tool he loves to get rid of the thing he loves, so he can finally love me again. I found the perfect recipe online. They say it tastes like lamb. I wonder if he'll notice. I wonder how he'll feel when I tell him his precious Buster is now a part of him. Inside him? Maybe then he'll finally realize that I am his real family, not some dog." The recording devolved into a rambling, incoherent monologue. She laughed, then cried, then hummed a little tune. It was the sound of a complete psychotic break. Jabari and Amara listened, frozen, as the recording neared its end. Then Imani's voice dropped to a cold, conspiratorial whisper, a final, chilling revelation that changed everything they thought they knew. "He thinks he's so clever. He thinks I don't know about the second gun, the one he keeps in the floor safe in his office, behind the bookshelf. He thinks I don't know the combination is my birthday. How ironic. He keeps his deadliest secret locked away with a tribute to me. Well, I know everything. And if he doesn't accept my gift, if he chooses a dead dog over his living, breathing wife, then I don't know what I'll do. But I know where the gun is." Chloe stopped the recording. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening. "A second gun? Amara breathed, looking at Jabari, her eyes wide. In a safe in his office. The entire case tilted on its axis. They had been looking for a murder weapon they assumed Leonard had hidden. But what if Leonard hadn't brought a gun to the fight? What if Imani already had one waiting? "Get a team back to the house now," Jabari commanded, his mind racing. "Search the office. Find that safe." The narrative they had so carefully constructed, of a husband snapping in a fit of rage, shattered. A new, far more complicated possibility emerged. Leonard didn't come home to an unsuspecting wife. He came home to a woman who had committed a monstrous act, who was armed, and who had a contingency plan for his rejection. He hadn't walked into a crime scene. He had walked into a trap. The digital evidence was the ultimate mini-hook. Imani wasn't just the catalyst. She may have been an armed and willing participant in the final, deadly confrontation. The mystery of the missing gun was solved. It was likely in her hands. The question now was not what Leonard did to her, but what happened between them. The interrogation room felt different this time. The air of accusation was gone, replaced by a heavy, somber tension. Leonard Brooks sat at the table, his face a gray mask of exhaustion. He had been cleared by the medical staff, but seemed to exist in a fog of trauma. Jabari and Amara didn't start with questions. They started with the truth. "Leonard," Jabari began, his voice low and even. "We know what Imani did. We found her journal. We unlocked her phone. We've seen the pictures, and we've heard the recordings." He let that sink in. He saw a flicker of something in Leonard's eyes, not guilt, but a profound, shared horror. For the first time, Leonard wasn't the only one who knew the full, terrible scope of what had happened. "We know she wasn't well, Leonard," Amara added softly. "We know she stopped taking her medication. We also know she found your second hunting rifle, the one in the safe." At the mention of the second gun, Leonard's head snapped up. His eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, locked onto Jabari's. The dam of his silence, built from fear and shock, finally broke. "You found it?" he whispered. "We did," Jabari confirmed. "Now, we need you to tell us what happened. Not the story you told the patrolman, the real story, from the moment you pulled into your driveway at 9:30 p.m. Leonard took a long, shuddering breath and began to speak. His voice was a monotone, a man reciting a nightmare he could never wake up from. "The hunt was a bust," he said, staring at the table. "It started raining and I had a bad feeling. I wanted to come home. I wanted to surprise Imani, take her out to dinner the next day. I pulled in around 9:30. I remember because the neighbor's kid, Kevin, was just getting home on his skateboard." He paused, gathering his strength. "The house was quiet, too quiet. When I opened the door, the candles were lit. Music was playing softly. Imani came out of the kitchen, and she was glowing. She was wearing a beautiful dress, smiling. She seemed normal, better than she had been in months. She said she'd made a special dinner, a reconciliation dinner. I was so happy," he choked out, a tear tracing a path through the stubble on his cheek. "I thought maybe she was back, the woman I married. Then I realized Buster hadn't come to the door. He always met me at the door. I asked where he was. She just smiled and said, 'He's here with us. He'll be part of our family forever now.' I didn't understand. I thought maybe she'd let him run off. I started to look for him. I went to the back door calling his name. That's when I saw his collar on the kitchen counter. My blood went cold. I knew something was wrong. I looked at the pot on the stove. I asked her, 'Imani, what's in the pot?' And she laughed. She told me. She was so proud. She said she did it for us, so there would be nothing between us anymore." Leonard's voice broke, but he pushed on, the words tumbling out as if a pressure valve had been released. "I didn't believe her. I couldn't. I ran outside to the shed. The smell, God, the smell, and the blood. I saw the scraps, and I knew. I threw up in the bushes. I think I screamed." He covered his face with his hands, his body shaking. "I went back inside, in a fog. I told her I was leaving, that I had to get out. That's when she changed. The smiling woman was gone. Her eyes were wild. She started screaming that I was ungrateful, that I loved that dog more than I loved her, that I was just like everyone else who was abandoning her. I went to the bedroom to pack a bag. She followed me, screaming. I just wanted to get away. But when I turned around from the closet, she was standing in the doorway, and she was holding my other rifle, the one from the safe. The detectives listened, spellbound. This was the moment. "She pointed it at me," Leonard whispered, his eyes wide with the memory. "She said if I tried to leave, she'd shoot me. And if she couldn't shoot me, she would shoot herself." She was hysterical. The gun was shaking in her hands. I was terrified it would just go off. I started talking to her, trying to calm her down. I told her we could fix this, that we'd get her help. I walked toward her, slowly, my hands up. I told her to give me the gun. When I got close enough, I reached for it. I grabbed the barrel. We struggled. She was surprisingly strong, twisting, pulling, screaming the whole time. My only thought was to get it pointed at the ceiling, but she fought me. We stumbled back against the wall, and it just went off. It was so loud. She just slumped. The gun fell, and there was so much blood. He fell silent, the story told. He looked up at Jabari and Amara, his face a wasteland of despair. I didn't mean to. I swear to God I never wanted to hurt her. I was just trying to stop her from hurting herself, or me. After it happened, I panicked. I looked at the scene, my dead wife, my dead dog. Who would ever believe the truth? It sounded insane. So, I made up the story about getting home late. I hid the gun under the porch. I didn't know what else to do. I just sat on the steps until I couldn't breathe anymore, and then I called. Silence descended on the room. His story was fantastical, horrifying, and almost impossible to believe. And yet, it fit every piece of evidence they had. The second gun, Imani's state of mind, the signs of a struggle. The confession wasn't an admission of guilt, but a plea for understanding. It was the story of an accident born from madness. Now, it was up to forensics to see if the final pieces of the puzzle would prove him right. The final pieces of the forensic puzzle clicked into place over the next 48 hours, and each one corroborated Leonard Brooks's incredible story. The preliminary report from the medical examiner noted severe bruising on Imani's wrists and arms, consistent with a violent struggle. Most importantly, the gunshot residue, GSR, test came back positive. There were significant traces of gunpowder on Imani's hands, indicating she had either fired the weapon or had her hands on it when it discharged at close range. The angle of the bullet's entry into her chest was also consistent with a weapon firing upwards during a chaotic, close-quarters struggle, not a deliberate aimed shot. Presented with the overwhelming evidence, the diary, the phone's contents, the GSR results, and Leonard's detailed confession, the district attorney's office made a decision. They dropped the charge of first-degree murder. Instead, Leonard Brooks was charged with involuntary manslaughter. The ensuing trial was a local media sensation, a tragic, bizarre story that captivated and horrified the Atlanta suburbs. The courtroom was a theater of pain. The prosecution argued that Leonard had acted with criminal negligence, that he should have retreated and called the police rather than engaging with an armed and unstable person. Leonard's defense attorney painted a picture of a terrified husband, faced with an unthinkable choice in a situation spiraling out of control in a matter of seconds. He argued that Leonard's actions were a desperate attempt to prevent a greater tragedy, a murder-suicide, and that Imani's death was a tragic accident, not a crime. Imani's family sat on one side of the courtroom, their faces a mixture of grief for their daughter and cold fury at the man they blamed for her death. They spoke of the bright, ambitious woman she had been before her illness took hold. Leonard's few remaining friends sat behind him, offering silent support for a man who had lost everything. Ultimately, the jury, moved by Leonard's tearful testimony and confronted with the chilling evidence of Imani's psychosis, found him guilty of the lesser charge. But in a moment of profound empathy, the judge sentenced him not to prison, but to 5 years of probation and mandatory, intensive grief and trauma counseling. "There are no winners in this room," the judge stated, his voice heavy. "This case is a catastrophic failure on multiple levels. A failure of our mental health system and a failure of a family to grasp the severity of an illness before it was too late. Sending this man to prison serves no purpose. His punishment is the memory of that night, and that is a life sentence he will carry forever." Months later, Detective Jabari Zinga sat in his office late at night, the city lights of Atlanta twinkling outside his window. The Brooks case file was on his desk, officially closed, but its ghosts remained. He thought about the thin, fragile line that separates sanity from madness, and how easily love, when twisted by illness, can curdle into a destructive obsession. There was no true villain in this story, only victims. Imani was a victim of a devastating mental illness that consumed her from the inside out, turning her love into a weapon. Leonard was a victim of circumstance, forced to watch the woman he loved disappear into a fog of paranoia, culminating in a night of unimaginable horror. And Buster, the happy-go-lucky beagle from the shelter, was the most innocent victim of all, a pawn in a human tragedy he could never have understood. Jabari closed the file. His career had been built on finding answers, on drawing clear lines between right and wrong, guilty and innocent. But the Brooks case had been different. It was a story painted entirely in shades of gray. It served as a brutal, unforgettable lesson. The most dangerous monsters aren't strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes they are the illnesses that wear the faces of those we love. The true crime wasn't just the single gunshot that ended Imani's life, but the silent, creeping illness that had claimed her mind long before, and the devastating truth that sometimes, even with all the love in the world, you can't save someone from themselves. It was a quiet reminder that the most important act of justice is not always punishment, but understanding, and the most vital act of community is to see the signs of struggle and offer help before the screams begin.